I was having some musings about what it means to have a path of Kung Fu. Um, it's really interesting because um, in some ways, Kung Fu is actually just being around long enough where you capture all the information or the information that you're looking for from the person who has it. And so, in some ways, like the more contact point that you increase, and the more you get to meet the person who has information, the more chances you have of being able to get the information. And of course, that comes with some, you know, different constituents, such as actually, is a person, are you behaving in such a way where the person would want to give you the information? Like for instance, if you actually behave as if you know the information, then most likely the person who has information will not want to give you the information that they have, even if they know that you don't know, because it's too much hassle to try and convince someone they don't know something. And so, um, and thus, the spiritual adage of the importance of humility. It, really, all we're really saying is that you're making it safe enough for the person to be able to give you the information. So we oftentimes think that the power is with the person who has information because we want that information, and so therefore we're subject to the person who has information. But what we often don't realize is that it's actually really not necessarily that safe for the person who has information to give the information either, because if the person who's receiving the information shows a lot of resistance, then it becomes very difficult for the person who has information to give the information. And um, so it's kind of like one, in some ways, you need to stay long enough to have the information, and two, you need to be the kind of person who makes it safe enough for the person who has the information to give you the information. And then, of course, there's a chance, and that's I think why the duration and the combination of being committed or dedicated, or being devoted, and then also being humble is so important if we use traditional spiritual language, because it allows people to stay long enough and to make it safe enough for the person who has the information to give you the information. And one of the key things that I've noticed when I was studying with my own teacher, Master Chen, is that you capture these days where your teacher's in a good mood, or is reminiscing, or is having an interesting day where they feel like talking about a certain particular subject, and you really actually get to see them in all their life. When you know them long enough, you really get to see them in all the different kinds of situations, during times of stress, during times of happiness, during times of sadness. I mean, you get to see the whole terrain. And after a certain while, like after spending a long time with them, you start seeing a certain pattern. And it's a gross accumulation of the pattern where, like, for instance, after 10, 20 years, you start realizing that you don't see a pattern beyond that. And that's actually, and you start being able to start thinking like them and come up with the same answers they would, or in a similar manner, where you can really tell that not only have you gotten the information, but now you also understand how they think from the information, how they use the information. Um, and when that happens, when you start thinking like them, you also start learning like them. And when you start learning like them, you start growing like them. And actually, that's the most important part, because even if you have the information, what I found is that if we don't have the core logic of how they operate with the knowledge, you actually end up in a very different path. And so I've seen people who have systems who learn the same thing, but they didn't stay long enough to actually really capture the logic of the teacher, so they end up in a very different way. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you didn't necessarily learn what the person that you were learning from has. Now, that may not be what you're after, but if you're trying to learn, if you're trying to learn some of the results that they're getting, then you're not going to be getting the results just with the information. You need to also use the information in the same manner and learn and grow in the same manner with the information, to be able to get the same results. And I think oftentimes people confuse having the same information as the same thing as getting the same results, which it's really not at all. As a matter of fact, I could actually make the argument that the information is less important than how the person thinks and utilizes information, because if you have that, even if you have less information, you'll actually still get the same results. And you will grow into be the kind of person who actually eventually gathers all that the same kind of information anyways. Because information is in some ways easier to obtain than how the information itself, the logic of how the information itself is used. And that's actually traditionally what's called the view and principles. And I actually see the same thing because, um, if I look at the trajectory of how I've grown over the years, ever since I graduated, um, I'm ending up more and more the same places my teacher was, even though we haven't been in contact, directly. But like the more I look at it, the more I look at my form, it's becoming more and more like him. And I had a lot less information than my teacher had, because when I had graduated, I had been practicing for about, a total of 20 some years, when my teacher had actually been practicing for 60 some years. And so there was 40 years of information deficit, you could actually say. Um, and it's not possible for me to catch all that. But when I had enough information, that's actually what a system is. The system is actually like just the core foundational information, the minimum information required to be able to see the logic. And once you have that, then the important study of the logic starts, and that's actually the more important thing. So it's kind of like you go through three different stages and three levels, which is level one, you learn the information. Level two, you get to a point where you can use the information properly, where you're getting the results you want. And number three, you actually completely and it's a level of mastery where you can completely break it down and actually argue as to why the information is incorrect, and you can come up with new things. And at that point, you've learned the logic because you're beyond the information. You have to be beyond the information. If you're not beyond the information, then that means that you haven't really gotten the logic, because someone who really has the system is beyond the information, because sometimes they will use the same information, sometimes they won't, depending on the context of what's going on or the situation of what's going on. So that's kind of like the reason why staying with a teacher for 10, 15, 20 years is actually so important, because the information most likely you will learn within the first 3 to 5 years. But then you need that extra time to actually kind of see how the information is being used and how the information is being used during the exceptions. And those are the really valuable moments. And if you start actually reaching some of the same conclusions as your teacher, then that's actually when you start graduating, when the teacher's been observing you for a number of oftentimes years, and actually you're reaching the same conclusions or within the same parameters of the logic. So it's kind of interesting. So this actually brings me to a different kind of segment. So if this is kind of like why devotion or commitment and humility is so important, where you make it safe and then you stay long enough where the opportunity arises to see your teacher in all the different situations of how to use the information that you just received, then that really is kind of like gets you the system. Now, having said that, I feel like one of the key things that's oftentimes ignored is, the idea, and this is actually the idea of becoming a teacher. So if this is actually the requirement, so first if I covered the requirement of what you would need in order to, get a system and, get a complete system in whatever area you're learning, then the second portion is actually the idea of, what does it take to actually make that 10, 20 years like really useful? And that's the idea of becoming the teacher. And what that means is that it's not enough to try and learn the information and the principles. It's really important what kind of person you're becoming. Now, becoming a teacher doesn't actually mean that you abandon yourself or that you stop being who you are. But it does mean that when you are with your teacher, you stop insisting on who you are because it's actually not relevant if you want to learn the information. But you become the kind of person who can utilize that information. So it's not really even about the teacher. It just happens to be the teacher is the closest approximation of someone who uses this information in a particular way within that system. So within the West, oftentimes what I observe, or in the modern day life, the information has become what's important. And I like to say information is important. Information and ideas really change the way you approach things. And I'm trying to actually describe such an idea, which is that when we are trying to master a certain area of subject, not only is the information important, but what kind of a person you need to become to be able to use that information in a manner that you aspire to use it. And I think considering that's really important. And the reason I say that is because what I've noticed is over the years, the kind of that you can actually use the information you have if you are not the kind of person that can use the information. And this sounds very redundant, but I'd like to give a demonstration. So because I had 14 years of traditional training before I met Master Chen, the information actually was easy to obtain. And the information wasn't what was difficult. What was difficult is actually the way I had to learn. So before, my teachers would actually teach me very step by step and in detail. And, if I'd ask a question, they'd answer the questions, and I was a good student. With my teacher, he wouldn't actually give me the information. He'd actually talk around it. And then he would tell me, he would talk to me, but he wouldn't really actually give me anything that I could. The information didn't come in a way that I was looking for. I was looking for very specific angles. I was looking for the logic behind the angles and what kind of imagery you need to have, where you're directing your intentions. I was looking for a lot of specifics. And my teacher would actually talk in terms of generalities and maybe give examples or tell stories. But the information I was looking for wasn't coming. And if anything, he'd just say like this and he'd show me, which would drive me crazy. Um, and um, uh, so I had to put in a lot of effort to learn in a manner uh, where really it wasn't about me at all. And I had a choice. I had a choice to um, uh, basically get caught up in my resistance of feeling like I'm not getting what I need to learn this, or I could actually just see what I needed to learn in that situation to be able to learn what I need to learn. And so ironically, I thought before humility was actually learning the information and basically asking for the information. I thought that's what humility was, but I realized that actually humility is actually bigger than that. It's actually being able to see beyond what you think is necessary to learn the information. We all have assumptions. We all have learning preferences. And what I found is that it's very difficult to see beyond our learning preferences and to set your personality and who you are aside. And the training of having to do so was really valuable. Um, and I learned a lot about what it means to actually really learn someone. And I realized at some point, oh, I'm actually not learning information at all, or technique. What's really more valuable is I'm listening of who the other person is, and then learning how I can understand them and become like them. Because the more I started imitating Master Chen, in order to try and understand how he was thinking, because that's actually really what happened is I couldn't relate to the information he was giving me or teaching me. So I had this brilliant idea that what if I started actually behaving more like him so that I could see if I could uh, uh, if I could start seeing how he saw the world and how he thought about things, kind of by acting like him. And so, if you will, I kind of got into the role. And it was probably one of the best things I did for myself because when I started doing that, And incidentally, years later, I had learned that actually in something that's called NLP, neuro linguistic programming, it's called rapport. And I started finding out actually why that's so effective, and that's why that's actually part of listening. But traditionally within the Tai Chi system, what I found is that that is actually called listening. It's called, within the principle, it's called forsake yourself and follow the opponent, or follow nature. And so it's within the concept of Tao Te Ching, of letting go of what people call your ego, which, I would say your identity and your personality. It's setting it aside. It's not giving up on who you are, actually. I think that's oftentimes how people understand it, and then self-sacrificing. But I would say it's actually just making sure that you're not letting yourself, or who you are, or your personality, actually, I wouldn't say who you are, because who you are is much bigger than your identity or your personality. So not letting your personality or your identity, the idea of who you are, get in the way of becoming who you're meant to be. Um, and giving up, I find that giving up your own personality or who you think you are, uh, it's painful because it feels like you're giving up who you are. But it's exactly the opposite. It's actually embracing the you that you don't even know yet. It's actually listening to what really is. It's kind of like, the best analogy that I can give is, oftentimes what I feel and find is that people, when they're in relationships, in new relationships, they fall in love with the idea of the person instead of the person. And that's, in the relationship, when you first fall in love, it's like what's called the meshing stage, where everything about the person just seems wonderful. Then after a certain period of time, typically in the very beginning for most people, like the first year, 2 or 3, you start actually getting into what's called a power struggle. Once you relax into a relationship and the glow phase is gone, you start, you know, having conflict in specific areas where your needs are opposing, such as, you have a need for neatness and your partner is more messy, or they have a need for lack of like such disciplined order and just more flow. And, in your case, your need is exactly the opposite. And what seemed like wonderful, where you said, "Oh, you're so carefree. Oh, you're so organized. You can help me," now it becomes, "Wow, you're really like impeding my life." The power struggle starts, and then you get into disillusionment because you think that you can change the other person to support you, and the definition of love is the other person understanding and changing to who you are. And then you find out they can't, and or they won't, for one reason or another. And then this you go into the stage of disillusionment, and then you're like in just pain of feeling like, wow, like what have I gotten myself into? Why didn't I listen to myself? And people go into all kinds of blame, like I should have listened to my intuition, and which I think is actually bogus, because it's kind of like saying you should have known better. But I don't know that you can, because you have to start with an idea of who the other person is. It's not like, even though the concept is that you listen, it's not like you can't have an idea. We all need assumptions to do something. So anyways, so you go into the disillusionment, and then you actually come into a decision. And the decision you need to is actually whether you're going to accept the other person as they are, and also will accept yourself as you are, and decide what you're going to do from that place. Okay, knowing that you're neat and the other person is messy, what do you want to do about it? Do you want to put in the work? Do you want to learn how to let go? Do you want to learn how to communicate differently? And that will really depend from the relationship to relationship, and what actually also works for one relationship won't work in another. So you may have actually maybe worked it on one relationship and you think that's going to work in the other, and it doesn't. And that is basically confusing the other person with your idea of who the other person is, or what the relationships are supposed to be like. And we do this all the time. And so it's natural for us to go to the pain of confusing of who we are. And that's what the identity and the personality is. That we just confuse who we are. And we don't actually study who we are in that moment, which is the only way we're going to learn. Because it's painful, because you have to struggle. And learning how to struggle gracefully is, at least from my perspective, a big part of what Tai Chi is and what listening is. And that, to me, was the greatest lesson I had to learn. I learned from Master Chen, the kind of person you need to be really be able to actually practice Tai Chi, what it means to really listen, to be able to actually, in a given moment, not forever, be able to set aside who you are and your own personality and your identity, and then be in the midst of struggle and still pay attention to what the lesson is and capture the moment as best as you can with as much peace as you can, and then in your own time be able to actually look at what that means, who you really are and who you're becoming, and actually understanding why you're struggling so much, and being able to see whether you want to approach this differently. And uh, my understanding of self really expanded from that, where I really realized, we really are limitless. Um, and your ego really doesn't need to be in the way. And oftentimes, when we struggle with our own self idea of who we are and our personality, we consider that, like, we call it ego. And um, I think all we need to really look at is that the current definition of who you are that you have is not working for you, and it's struggling because it doesn't know what else to do, and all we need to do is expand our definition of who we are, because we can't get rid of the ego. I mean, you need a kind of like an operating system to get rid of the ego, to say like you're gonna get rid of all your assumptions. If you get rid of all your assumptions, you can't do anything because it's your basic operating procedure. And so by um, just looking at um, who, uh, that by just looking at expanding your definition of who you are, uh, you actually get to learn in that moment and listen. And the key thing is to actually listen to the present moment, actually notice all the resistances so that you can actually relax and learn, see how you can actually not resist, and with an expanded awareness. And oftentimes that involves of shifting where your attention is. You need a higher leverage point. When you're stuck, um, you're using the wrong leverage point and you have the wrong focus. And so you need to actually find a new target that allows you to achieve what you wanted to achieve. And sometimes you realize that the goal you are after is actually not the real goal you're after. And so sometimes you have to even actually reassess whether the target you're going after is even the target you want, or sometimes you have to adjust your path. So that's why it's called view path fruit, meaning as in so there are three things that you need to adjust, which is one is the target. Is the target still true? Is it as good? Is the method or the way you're going about trying to achieve the target actually still good? Because sometimes the method needs to be adjusted. And we're very actually, oftentimes we're very particular about method because it lines up with our instincts. We oftentimes choose methods that's easier for instincts, and sometimes the way we need to get is not easy for instincts at all. And so we need to sometimes reevaluate how we do things. And the method that's not easy for us actually might still, on the whole, be worth the effort to get to the target. And if that's the case, then we might be creating unnecessary pain for ourselves for something that's very doable. And then last, sometimes we get there and we don't realize we are already there because the fruit, the results, the way we verify of how we got there was so out of reality that we got there and it looked different. Like, for instance, in my case, when I learned the whole system, I felt I was going to feel very different. I felt like I was going to feel like a superhuman being or something. And I learned the whole system and I felt, oh, yep, I still feel the same. I'm just a human being. And, it's like nothing had changed. And that was kind of like it was really helpful. I realized, oh, I really thought I was going to feel different. But at the very least, I didn't assume that I hadn't gotten there because I understood this. So, um, so actually, this is kind of coming back. I feel like the idea of becoming something. Who are we becoming? And that when we're learning a system, the concept of that you're becoming a teacher, and the reason you're becoming a teacher is because that person is a particular example of someone who's getting the kind of results that you're looking for. And in order to get the kind of results, you have to be able to see what they see, select the kind of targets that they select, and see how they select the methods. And that's the particular logic you're looking for that I was talking about, the view, path, fruit, and then how they recognize the results. And that has to happen within the information or the system that you have, because otherwise there's no way to verify, that you're using the information properly. So the information is the playground, the toy that you play with, and then your view, path, fruit is basically how you select a target and how you use the information, and then how you verify you use the information correctly. And within that, you actually learn the logic, and that logic can be used into the rest of life with new information that comes in, because the information itself is irrelevant. It's really the view, path, fruit that's more important. So, um, anyways, so that actually kind of brings us back to, um, just some more examples, uh, or actually, before I go there, just to finish up. So in order to do that, and that actually is the view, path, truth, and this concept actually allows us to have this idea that we're really actually, whenever we're caught up in a situation, we're realizing that the identity or the definition that we have of ourselves or how the world operates is incorrect, and we need to expand that, which oftentimes means that you need a new view and a new path, or a different way to utilize the path, and a new fruit, a new way to recognize what you're getting. So, now that's actually really important, because within the context of a dojo, um, you know, we have to kind of look at a lot of different things, which is like simple things such as what kind of a person would a teacher give the information to? And the reason we need to look at it is because that's the kind of person that the teacher is. And so if you were a teacher, what kind of a person would you give the information to? And the question becomes, would you give the information to someone that respects you, or would you give the information to someone who doesn't respect you? Would you give the information who um, tries to tell your teacher that you're smart, and that you're capable, and that you know a lot, and look at how I'm succeeding? Or would you give the information to someone who is really actually focused on what you're learning, is not so actually, is not really so interested in impressing you, but actually is really focused on whatever, to learn what you've got, whatever it takes. Uh, and I think the answer is probably apparent to you. Oftentimes we try and impress the people that we're learning from so that they will like us. What we don't realize is that actually what makes them like us is us being, if you will, humble, not smart. Um, this became really apparent to me as I was teaching, because I realized the smart people, they would oftentimes leave before they learned the whole thing because they assumed they got it. And sometimes, uh, I would I like teaching fast, or at least I used to like teaching fast. So because I used to like teaching fast, I would try and teach as fast as I can. And sometimes their ability actually would be close to mine, and then there wouldn't be a huge gap between my ability and the person's ability, because sometimes there are different factors. Maybe it's the same skill within that, but they're actually, maybe they have a lot less skill, but they're stronger and heavier and bigger, and so I can't actually do as much with them. But the skill level is considerably different, but unfortunately, the skill level that I'm at can't actually demonstrate how big the gap really is. In that case, they would assume, I'm really close. I might even be better, and then they leave. And in that case, if I try and explain to them, no, you're really lacking a lot of skill, now I just seem defensive. And so there's actually almost no point to try and convince them, because they're already convinced. It's very difficult to convince someone who's already convinced. And so it's kind of like one of those things where, I learned it's very difficult to teach someone who's trying to impress you that they're capable students, actually. And so, but what actually has been really effective is teaching students who really actually don't care whether they're smart or not, or even actually assume that they're not smart, even if they are. Uh, because what I found is actually there is no such thing as a dumb student. Actually, I've found that there are people who believe they're dumb or incapable, but I found actually that's just a matter of insecurity. But it's almost easier to teach those people that assume that don't because they're desperate to get the information. And ironically, you know, that desperation really helps them focus on the information and actually doing whatever it's needed and takes to get the information. And um, and giving the same logic. So if you have someone who actually is like, this actually happens often where if I give a correction, people will say, give me the reason as to why I didn't get it. And one of the reasons people tell that is because they're afraid that I'm going to think ill of them, which, makes sense. I've gone through the same thing. But having said that, one of the most valuable lessons I've learned is when someone gives me a correction, if I get it, I get it, and I thank them for it, and I thank them for how much it impacted me and how much I appreciate the information, and not say and explain to them why I didn't get it. That's actually irrelevant. Uh, or uh, or if I did think about the information, say that I was thinking about that, but I really appreciate the fine tunement because that I was missing that, and now that that's actually happening, how much better the information is utilizing, and I really appreciate the feedback. Or to focus on a question as to saying, and actually when you ask a question, you need to be cautious that you're not going the negative direction where you say, saying like that, well, that doesn't make sense, or saying, well, how come that's the case? Instead of actually going to a question, it's actually really important how you ask the question, which is being able to say, wow, okay, you taught me this, and you taught me this and this, and I thought that it would be this, but you're saying this. I'm not quite understanding actually how they line up. Can you please explain to me, like, in all honesty, why you are not getting it? Like, explain the context and showing, specifically why you're not understanding it, instead of actually just saying, I don't get it. And that makes it way too difficult for the other person, the teacher, to teach you because, it's like now, how much do they need to really explain? And, or if you're asking the question from a negative perspective, then they now have to fight you. That's really not worth it, especially if they have a lot of students or they don't have the time. And so they stop actually correcting you because it's just not worth it. But if you show appreciation, and if you don't focus as to why you didn't get it, but you focus on what you want to get and why you're having trouble getting it and why, in what specific area you need help with, all of a sudden they want to teach you because it's easy to teach you. And it stops becoming about you and it becomes about the information, not even about the teacher. It being about the teacher is also good, but it becomes about appreciation of the person giving you feedback and teaching you, and it becomes about appreciation of the information itself. And it's just such a wonderful combination, such a powerful combination. And so the information just starts coming to you because it becomes super safe for the teacher to teach you. So when you're learning, don't ever try and impress your teacher. Actually, they will be impressed if you focus on learning uh, and not on who you are. Who you are is irrelevant with your teacher if you really think about it, because now, ironically, if you focus on what you're learning, they naturally become interested in you because they want to teach you more, and in order to teach you more, they need to understand you better, because it's safe to find out about you. But if you try and insist on who you are, it becomes very unsafe for the teacher to teach you because oftentimes when a teacher is teaching, they have a lot of different students, and they can't be fighting with you to try and get past your resistance. So they naturally look for where the information wants to flow. And so, um, uh, it's kind of just a natural way. It's not that they don't want to teach you either. If they knew how to teach you, they would. And if they knew how to get past your resistance, they would. But typically the ways to get past resistance of someone who is feeling like they need to impress the teacher and actually teach the teacher who they are so that they're seen, you know, uh, it's kind of like saying you have to focus on me and not focus on anyone else. And that's really not what you're really saying. You just want the opportunity to, of course, learn. but it actually ends up being that within someone who is responsible for multiple people. Or even if you're the only student, they still have a life and they still have a limited time, and they need to try and deliver the information to you within that given time. And so if you focus on who you are, then it stops becoming about what the moment is about, which is the learning and the information that you have to learn. And because of that, the person can focus on it because they say, well, I actually don't have the time or the context or the wherewithal to really focus on who you are. I was just actually only really signing up just to teach you this information. And now that becomes a fight. But that's really what most of the struggle is about. Now, if you understand that, and if you focus on information, naturally the person will start actually studying who you are. And you can start giving them small snippets of saying, like, I have this learning issue here, and because of that, I feel like I'm having like I have difficulty with auditory learning, so I feel like I'm having difficulty learning it. I'm really trying, but can you maybe like give like a visual example if at all possible? If not, I understand. And by taking away the burden of having to do something, the teacher naturally will actually want to see if they can. If they don't, that means that they can't. And because people typically want to try and help you in the manner that you want to be helped. If they're not, it's because they genuinely feel like they can. And if you still show appreciation, eventually they come over because they find a way. And also you find different ways to do it. And so again, over time, like kind of having a long view of learning is so important. And so this is kind of like an example of how you can let go of the definition of who you are, expand yourself, and also adjust your view path on food. It's kind of like, how to, what to focus on. So we had to adjust the focus from showing who you are so they can teach you better to actually focusing on the information itself that you're learning and making it about that, and on the teacher, because typically if you don't do that, then ironically without intending to, you're saying you need to focus on me, instead of anyone else, or the rest of your life. And I'm what's important, you're not important. Instead, we're just saying, I acknowledge you're important. I'm here to learn the information because that's the agreement. That's why I showed up in your class. That's like unspoken agreement. And then that allows you, the person, the choice to focus on you. And it's kind of a beautiful combination. And ironically, you're giving them an invitation to focus on you. So, for this one example, so kind of like, if you were the teacher, who would you focus on? You would focus on a student who actually focuses on you and your needs, because then it's safe for you to teach. Now, of course, that's not a spoken thing or it's even conceptual, but then you would also focus on a student who is considered of their classmates, because they're your other students. If you're a teacher, you care about all your students. Now, a teacher may not necessarily treat everyone equally or even well, but oftentimes that's the teacher's failing because they don't know how. But if you talk to any teacher, even the ones that they, supposedly dislike or hate, which is really not true, they're really actually more frustrated with their ability to actually get through with the students. And really, actually, a teacher genuinely actually loves all the students, and if they have the choice, they want to make sure all the students get it. And it's a constant struggle of a teacher. And if you have just think about this, if you're the teacher and you have a student who takes care of the other students when you feel like you can get to them, how would you feel? And so, and then last, the Sangha. So that's the Sangha, the community, and then the organization itself. So basically, if you think about it, the kind of things that a teacher will look at is someone who values the teacher, values the community or the other disciples, values the organization itself, and then values the system. And there's a reason why the organization system is because the organization is actually how you get together to make everything possible. And so if you hate the organization but you love the people and the teacher, and you don't like how the organization is being run, then, and the teacher is part of it, then you kind of almost put your teacher in contention with the organization. And it's kind of like complaining about the space. The teacher now may not have a choice about teaching in a space or in that organization, and if you make it bad, then you actually make the teacher look bad or feel bad. And it's kind of like, and if you think about this, a teacher is ultimately responsible for how the space looks. And if you are caught up in socializing and making sure that you have a good relationship with the teacher, but then you just leave and you don't clean or you don't take care of the organization or the space, then actually the one, you may not realize this, but the one who takes care of the space, actually the one who's ultimately responsible is the teacher. If the teacher owns the space, then they have to actually clean up, or it falls on just a few students who do if you're not part of that, and that doesn't feel very good. And you tend to actually give more to the people who take care of the organization because they're actually helping you directly. They're helping your job. Like if you're a teacher and you have to clean up and everybody left, but there are a few students who stayed to help you clean up and close shop, just imagine how they would feel. And that's actually how you earn a lot of brownie points, and actually ironically that's actually when you learn the most amount of information, because they want to give you something for the extra work that you did. And because of that, because they can tell you care about the organization, they give you a little extra for making it easier for them to do the whole thing. It's like the hidden part that students typically don't get to see. We tend to be people focused, and so because we're people focused, we oftentimes forget how much work it is to be a part of the organization. Organization, doesn't matter what organization is, always works against you in one way, because it can never always work for you, because an organization is an approximation and a system of taking care of the average need of the people in the organization. That means that it's not going to be specifically catered to you, which means that there will always be times where your needs are not being met. And if you are not taking care of the organization, then you're making it very difficult for the person who has to lean on the organization to work with the organization. And so it's kind of like a wisdom. If you value the organization, even if it's not a stellar one, you actually make it easier for the teacher to teach you and teach the class. And if you help the teacher teach the class better, then the teacher is at more at ease, and actually you get the information better. And this is actually one of the key things, where my teacher didn't even seem like he had an organization, but there was a group of people that gathered, and every time there's a group of people who gather, that's an organization. And they have rules. Even if they're loosely tied rules, the rules is that it's loosely tied. And by supporting that organizational structure, I made it easier for my teacher to be appreciated and teach and have him feel good about the organization. And, that reduced his stress and his workload. And, by supporting the Sangha, the other disciples, it makes it easier again for him to teach. And you naturally want to support the person who is supporting other people, because it's a high leverage point for you. So, and last, the system. Why would you want to teach someone, just think about this, who doesn't seem to value the information? Now, if you're there to learn, of course you value the information. Like, there's no question about it. Of course you value the information. But some behaviors lend more to show that and make it clear. It's a matter of communication, I believe. And for some people, actually, they don't. And so, by focusing on how, the learning and the information that you're getting, and not focusing on yourself, you're showing the teacher that you value it. And by teaching it by working with it, or actually, here's a big one: learning from your other classmates or being humble with your other classmates gives you as much points as actually teaching other people. Actually, I'm going to say that gives you even more points, because it's always easy to learn from other people and make them feel good. then try and teach them. Oftentimes, even if you're a senior, it's very difficult for you to teach because people have, such huge uh, esteem issues of not being under, meaning as in they don't want to be taught because they don't want to give the impression that, that they're not as good or they're not as capable, and and ironically, you lose respect that way. Because if you've ever tried to, see someone who's struggling and you give them advice because you see this particular thing and they actually show resistance, it's not exactly that you feel, um, how should I say, appreciation for that person. And so by actually learning how to learn, and this is actually one of the probably the things that actually earned, now in retrospect, a lot of points for me is um, the um, listening to even the junior students. So in my case, I was like, if I go to a seminar, like especially towards the end, like I had like almost like 18 to 20 years of experience. And when I go to the seminars, there'll be these people who just actually maybe joined and been there for maybe a year to maybe a few months, and uh, uh, and because I believe I made it safe. Almost everybody wanted to teach me, like when I go to seminars, um, because I focus on the information. I wouldn't focus off why I wouldn't get it, wasn't getting it, or whether I knew it. I just, if someone talked to me, I said, oh, and then I'd listen and I'd focus on the information. And if it wasn't correct, then I just let it go. But I just listen. I wouldn't have to point out. I mean, that's not really the point. So because of that, a lot of people would give me information, and I had this experience of actually getting information from the beginning student all the way to the senior in this one seminar with people, with this one master. It was really interesting to put together all those different stories of the master and gave me really a much better picture, even within just one seminar of this teacher. And I got so much out of that. And ironically, actually, uh, with even just within one seminar, uh, actually the second seminar I showed up, this person started using me as a dummy. That typically doesn't happen for years. You need to earn enough trust. But this person, this master, started using me, and that's a huge honor. And because you get to experience a master on your own body, and you really get to see, and it's not hypothetical anymore. And that's a difficult opportunity. And um, and one of the reasons is because I just listened. And so one of probably the highest leverage point is actually to listen to everyone, and focus on the information, which is seen as humility, because that's really what it is. Because you're not trying to impress people, and that's actually what most people actually see as arrogance. And ironically, when you do that, your ability naturally goes up because you're focusing on the information, you grow, and the feedback. So if you focus on the feedback and the information and the growth, then you naturally grow. So you become impressive. So people start having respect for you, and you become capable because people see it for themselves. If you have to tell people and actually convince them, that has the opposite effect, ironically, because they're not convinced. You're trying to convince them, so that's an automatic resistance. So, if I were to kind of summarize, like someone who can focus and make the teacher's life easier and make it safe for them to give you feedback by focusing on the appreciation of what they're doing for you, such as giving you feedback, uh, and focusing on the information, and then focusing on taking care and being considerate of the other classmates, and don't think of that as teaching. That really doesn't happen until later. You need to be senior enough for people to want to learn from you, and so that's actually low leverage point. The higher leverage point is actually just if people are cleaning up together, or actually just trying to clean more, or take the burden off of your classmates, or actually learning from them. Those are the real high leverage points, actually, because you can do that anytime, anywhere. You can do that when you join a new group, and and then taking care of the organization, like again, like cleaning, taking order, and what's the word for it? Working with the organization instead of actually feeling like it's not working for you, because it's not going to. And then last, actually, really uh, focusing on and uh, making what you're learning precious and showing gratitude and appreciation and how it's working. And that's actually I found does me good because I would tell my teacher how, what I was learning was really just making such a huge difference. And I was just talking about, the different kind of realizations I was having from the things I learned. And my teacher, and actually that made me feel good and actually made me realize things besides actually letting my teacher know what I was learning. But of course, it wasn't like, oh, look at, what I've learned. It was more like just saying, I really appreciate this. This really just helped me here. And I didn't even realize that was actually possible. It's not like, oh, look at what I learned. Like, oh, look at, and so, um, because again, it's like this small difference between don't try and impress your teacher, show appreciation. So make your teacher great, don't make you great. If you make the teacher great, the teacher will think positive of you anyways. If you think about it, if you were ever like in a party or if you were in a get together, the people that you remember and that make you feel bad are people who ask questions about you and are people who make you feel good and are curious about you and appreciate who you are, which is actually the reason why we want to try and be appreciated and be seen. Ironically, the way to do that is actually not by trying to be appreciated, but actually by, um, appreciating the other person and not actually trying to impress them. That has the opposite effect, actually. So now, having said that, oftentimes this is misunderstood as having to sacrifice yourself. That's very, very different. Focusing on the learning material is very different from self-sacrificing. So we need to learn how to distinguish between couching our needs. So if you have a need, like say for instance, like it's time for cleaning, but like you have, like you injured your shoulder or you're having knee pains or something like that, and you can't, then you gotta go up to the teacher and say, look, I really want to be a part of this and I want to do this, but I'm not so sure how I can contribute. And you still need to actually contribute. You can't think about not contributing, but you gotta ask, how can I contribute in view of, like, I have this and I feel like if I do this it causes more pain and I'm, like it's and it's really actually causing, an issue for me, but then is there anything else I can do? And oftentimes it generates ideas and they actually let you be a part of it. And that's very important that you become a part of it because you do want to be a part of it. You don't want to leave feeling like you can't do it or you got out of something, or you want to actually feel like you're contributing because that's actually what makes us feel good. You want to feel like you're part of this. You want to feel like you're valuing the organization and your classmates and taking care of the teacher and that you're getting a great deal and that's the least you can do for the information you're getting. This is kind of like a traditional mindset. And it works great for learning, actually, and it works great for relationships, and it allows you to take care of your needs and you feel really taken care of because it allows you to, take care of your needs and voice them. But then at the same time, you also impress people by actually not trying to impress them, but ironically doing the opposite, which is trying to actually be impressed by them by, appreciating them, showing gratitude, and focusing on them and the information and what's at hand, the task at hand. And when that happens, naturally people focus on you. And when you have a need to actually clearly state that, and state them in a way where you're still part of it, and saying, I want to be part of this and I want to contribute. I'm just not sure how I can do that. Can you please help me so? And that will happen. And sometimes they will just say, no, you know what? You should just rest. In that case, you apologize for the inconvenience that you may be causing because it is more work. It is more burden because you can't participate. And so that's natural. But then at the same time, also saying that you really are grateful that they're willing to take your needs into consideration. And that just makes everyone feel good. So this is the kind of person who will actually learn the system, the full system, because you will become eventually senior enough and you will become important enough because you will be having enough of the system. So the more system you have, the more you need to be taught because you're close, so the teacher will want to finish you so that it can be passed on. And you're now beneficial to the organization because you're working with it and you've gotten really good with it, and you're taking care of it at this point and still actually learning because if you have the habit of taking information from the new students, then you're a good teacher because you're still actually learning from them, because that's the only kind of person who really becomes a teacher, who still learns from beginners. They may not look like it, but they are, because that habit doesn't go away. and they know how to treat people with respect, because if you know how to treat the teacher, then you actually know how to treat everyone. And so such a person, it becomes impossible to not teach that person. And so that's the kind of person who learns. And so ironically, who you are is more important to learning than you focusing on trying to learn the information. That you will never learn that way. It will only take you so far, and at least what I've experienced, especially with something like Tai Chi, because it's a life system. And so, so that's kind of like a more concrete example of, how when we're learning, why commitment is important and why um, making it safe and humility is important. And then that simple two principle, commitment and humility, we can call that the word devotion, right? Because if someone is committed and humble, they look devoted. They're someone like, oh, you would say, oh wow, that person's really devoted. And who's actually, it's like someone who's humble, who's committed, and who is grateful is someone who's got devotion, right? So three things. And someone who's humble and is grateful is the person who gets the information because they make it safe for the teacher to teach. And that the simple concept of devotion broken into commitment, humility, and gratitude in a more detail in terms of how you actually do it would be actually the concept of learning how to become the teacher, which actually means that you give up the limited definition of who you are and embrace a more expanded definition of who you are that can actually deal with the new situation that's arising. And the way you do that is by adjusting the view path through, by adjusting your target, by adjusting the way you go about doing it, and by adjusting how you recognize you got there or not. And the examples within this particular context of learning is by learning how to focus on the teacher and your classmates or the community, the sangha, as the Buddhists would call it, or the congregation, and then the organization itself. That's different. The organization is actually the structure, the infrastructure of how the groups of people actually, the rules and the culture of how people actually relate to each other, and that's the organization. And then the last, the actual system itself, or the information itself, or whatever it is that you got together, the main point to value that. And so by learning how to do that, really actually become the kind of person who can actually inherit the system. And to break that even more, we talked about how the way you do that is by focusing on the information itself and the appreciation of the person who is correcting you and is giving the information, and not trying to impress the other person by telling them why you're not getting it or making it about you. And that actually has the opposite effect. But if you focus on those things, that actually naturally they start seeing you, because you become someone who is important to the organization, to the community, and to the teacher, and the system naturally built within them, and it becomes necessary for them to actually learn who you are, and that actually doesn't mean that you don't actually advocate for your needs, that you need to do that. As a matter of fact, but then when you advocate for your needs, that doesn't mean that you're not a part of what they're going, but you need to ask for your needs in such a way, hey, I can't do this because of this. Is there a way I can still contribute and be part of? Two things, contribute and part of, because you want to stay connected. And that by doing that, by just simply approaching it this way, that you feel good, you feel part of, you are working with the organization, you become really valuable to your classmates, and that you become valuable to the teacher, and automatically you start impressing everyone instead of actually struggling and fighting to impress people. So it's kind of like an overall summary of everything we talked about. Now, last, what I want to talk about is when you're in a path of something like this, that it kind of loops back to the beginning, but that we really want to actually have a longer time frame. And this is really what I like to say. I feel like when I teach information like this, people become overly critical of who they are, and overly critical and become, because when I give teachings like this, like oftentimes people have a lot of corrections to make, and they try and do all of this within a short time frame, when this is actually something that's learned over a period of about a decade to even maybe two. Um, and what I like to say is that, like, if you get information like this, that you keep listening to this periodically, and actually seeing like the highest leverage point, one thing, small thing you can adjust, or a few that actually is kind of your minimum that you can do consistently, even on your worst day. Like something that's really easy to do, and just start actually making adjustments there, because um, eh, we need a longer view. This is not something that's just going to change overnight. And that's the last thing I'd like to say within this whole thing about what it means to, uh, become the kind of person. So, um, the last thing now after the summary that I'd like to conclude this with is um, this uh, story. So in my case, I was a good student. I wasn't a good teacher. When I graduated from my teacher, I was a good student, but I was not a good teacher. And the reason I say this is because this is actually kind of like a additional learning story where the reason I say take it slowly, because some lessons really, it takes some time for it to seep in. When I graduated, the pain of learning slowly. So I'm someone by personality who really values learning fast. Like I love efficiency. So the faster the quicker. And so I was in a lot of pain about having spent so much time to actually just learn the information that I did, which I thought could have been done in much less time. And I was mistaken because I was not taking into consideration the kind of character I needed to build to actually really be able to utilize information. And so when I started teaching the system with Master Chen's permission, I started actually breaking all the rules. I started going with the secrets first, and I started teaching everything, and people started having like really fast results, and I was considered a good teacher. Now, as I said earlier, one of the stories I told, I was telling, was that when I started doing that, people started leave prematurely because they didn't have the character to be able to deserve the information. Meaning, as in, they didn't have enough humility, if you will, to actually consider the fact that they may be less skilled, because they were so focused on impressing themselves, if you will, and they were concerned that they wouldn't impress themselves if they didn't stick to focusing on how impressive they were. Because that's the fear, I think, nowadays, that you may not be much. And I think that fear drives us, the fear that we may not be important. And I think that's really sad, because I think that fear exists because um, you know we're trying to defend our limited definition of who we are instead of actually who we really are, the vast unknown of who we are. And so if you were to focus on humility and learning and growth, then we are really focusing on the parts that have to yet be revealed, the really impressive parts of ourselves, the infinite parts of who we are. Humility automatically acknowledges that we're infinite, um, because it says that we have to grow. Ironically, trying to show that we're impressive does exactly the opposite. It shows that we're finite, because we're trying to impress people from who we are as we know of who we are in this moment, and we have to try and make ourselves greater than who we are, which fundamentally causes a significant kind of self-esteem or um, anxiety of capability issues. Because what if the person actually thinks of who you are, and you can't live up to it. And so I personally find, I've learned, it's much easier to live life where you try to not impress people and then have be impressed because you're trying to not impress them, then try and impress them and then live with the fear of worrying whether you're not going to live up to that expectation. And so, I have the exact opposite approach, and I find my life to be much easier and better and much more enjoyable, actually. I can just be myself and allow myself to make mistakes. and laugh together with people or tell stories about it instead of trying to give this perfect image of who I am, which doesn't even exist. I don't even know what that means. But having said that, so because of this pain I tried to basically teach people, as quickly as I can. And because of that, as I mentioned, uh, I was considered to be a good teacher because I could get people to get fast results. And because of that, people would leave because I hadn't taught them the most important thing, which is character. And now, one of the greatest gifts that my teacher had is he actually didn't care. And in several conversations, I had to ask my teacher, why is it that you are not teaching the system? Why is it that, like, you didn't care? Why is it you don't ever correct people? And he said, basically, I don't care whether the system gets passed on. And I was just shocked. And I thought that either he was irresponsible, or I thought that he was lying to me, or some version of that. Anyways, I just couldn't see how this valuable information, as you can see, I really value the information. This valuable information he had, that he didn't care to pass it on. And I realized that I was overzealous to pass on the information. I wanted to be done with it. I wanted to just pass it on and spread the information because I thought it was so valuable and because I benefited so much from it. And I thought that it was a waste of time to make it difficult for people to learn it, or, I guess what you would call character development. Now I have the exact opposite experience of that because after teaching like that for 10 years, I got nowhere. And I didn't have a single student to my name who was actually really getting it in 10 years of teaching. And I've been actually teaching even longer than that. But anyways, this is Master Chin system. And I started actually looking at how I learned. And I realized from my pain of not having achieved anything, that really actually what was missing is a character development. And I hadn't focused on that at all. I was focused on information dissemination, which is drastically different from actually really getting the system of the view path food. I hadn't focused on the view path food. I'd only focused on the information. And I'd made the information more important than really the essence of the system, which is the view path food. And I realized that's actually why I had failed. People had left after they got the information. They didn't leave after they got view path food because my focus was actually on the information. And that's when I realized, oh. And that's actually when I started teaching more the traditional way. And now I feel the same as my teacher. I actually don't care whether people get the information or not, or even whether the system is actually passed on or not. I'm realizing that's actually beyond me. That's really up to destiny. The best I can do is make sure that I create the best opportunity for people to become the kind of people that can actually get what I got, which I think is great. And now I can say with some peace that I actually don't care that people actually get it or not. And as I say that, I realize that I'm saying I really care a lot. And because I care so much, I've actually managed to let go of that and actually just focus on what is actually going to help people get there, which is their character development. And so I want to close with that story because I feel like, it's better to tell the story with my failing, that, having the information is actually really not what gets you there. I had the information. I had succeeded as a student. I had failed as a teacher. And because of that, ironically, I had failed as a student. And, now, with like this view, when I got that, I felt a balance. And it actually allowed me to get the system better, and actually really see it in its full scope, because I was also able to focus more on my own who I'm becoming instead of actually the ability. And I think that's a really high leverage point. And I think I want to tell this story and I want to make this more apparent because I feel like this is such a good way to start studying, to understand that it's not just about the information, but actually who you are. And then who you are is determined by your view past food. and then with some concrete examples. And that you really need to actually look at the longer term view. And to sum it all up, that within the Chinese or the Asian cultivation culture, a full cultivation cycle is 60 years. And I like to say that if you view anything less than 30 years, it's actually incomplete. And so you really want to view things within 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, uh, 7, 5, 3, and then 1, and then, and then being able to kind of reduce it down to months, weeks, and then the day, so you know what you should be doing today. So within this, I like to say, take a long view. Don't be in a rush, but be in a rush about the small things that you can get. Don't be in a rush about like the whole thing. It's not gonna come. You're gonna choke on it. And within the small thing you can get, focus on who you're becoming with in relation to your teacher, to your classmates, to the community, the same thing, and to the organization and to the system. And then, ironically, they will naturally bring the focus to you. If you focus on yourself, except for outside of your needs, but if you focus on yourself to try and be impressive, then you will forever have to live with the fear that you're not going to be able to live up to who you want to be. So now, hopefully that was a good summary, and this will be helpful. And have a great day. Because if you have a great day today, then you will have a great forever. Thank you.